On what was meant to be the happiest day of my life, my father's anger shattered my dreams. As I stood at the altar, hoping for his acceptance of my love for Jake, he stormed toward me and slapped my cheek. Why choose a truck driver? He's a man of bad character. The shock in the room was palpable, and chaos was just beginning. But suddenly, something unexpected happened in the next few hours. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I never thought my wedding day would turn into a scene straight out of a nightmare. As I stand here, reflecting on the events that unfolded, I realize that the path I walked was not just about love and celebration, but also about resilience and the struggle for self-empowerment. It all began in the vibrant city of Tucson, Arizona, where I had planned what I hoped would be the happiest day of my life. I had just turned 30, and as a dedicated professor, I believed I had my life together. I loved my job, where I inspired students to reach their full potential, just as I aspired to do. I had fallen deeply in love with Jake, a 35-year-old truck driver whose hardworking nature and kind heart stole my breath away. He was everything I had ever wanted, supportive, loving, and always there when I needed him. Our relationship blossomed like the beautiful flowers in the garden where we decided to hold our wedding. The sun shone brilliantly that day, illuminating the garden with its warm embrace. I could feel the excitement in the air as my friends and family gathered to witness our vows. But amidst the joyous atmosphere, there was an underlying tension that weighed heavily on my heart. My father, Mr. Turner, a successful businessman, was not fond of Jake. He had always made it clear that he considered Jake's occupation beneath my potential. I often heard him mutter about how truck drivers lacked ambition, and I knew he believed Jake was a bad influence on me. "Jennifer, you deserve someone who can provide for you," my father would say with a stern look. "Someone who will uplift your status, not drag you down." Despite his constant disapproval, I chose to marry Jake, hoping that my father would eventually come to accept him. After all, love should be enough, right? But as I walked down the aisle in my white gown, I could feel my father's eyes boring into my back, filled with disappointment and judgment. It made my heart race with anxiety, but I tried to push those feelings aside. As I exchanged vows with Jake, his eyes sparkled with joy. "I promise to love you, support you, and make you happy every single day," he said, his voice steady and true. I felt a surge of hope as we sealed our commitment with a kiss, but little did I know that the real challenges were still to come. After the ceremony, the reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and the clinking of glasses, but the air was thick with unease. I glanced at my father, who stood apart from the festivities, his arms crossed, his face set in a grimace. I tried to engage him in conversation, to lighten the mood. "Dad, isn't this beautiful?" I said, forcing a smile. His response was a dismissive grunt. "It's just a show, Jennifer. You deserve better than this." I sighed, trying to shake off the heaviness of his words. Jake noticed the shift in my mood and squeezed my hand under the table, silently offering his support. "Ignore him, Jen. This is our day," he whispered, his voice warm and reassuring. But as the evening progressed, the tension reached a breaking point. My father stood up to give a toast, and I hoped he would finally acknowledge Jake and our love. Instead, his words cut like ice. "I'm disappointed in this union," he began, his voice sharp and cold. "I don't see how marrying a truck driver can ever lead to a happy life for my daughter. You're settling, Jennifer. I expect better from you." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. My heart sank. I felt the heat rising to my cheeks as humiliation washed over me. I wanted to scream, to defend Jake, but my voice was caught in my throat. Jake, however, stood up for himself. "I love Jennifer, and I'll always treat her with respect and love," he declared, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "That's what truly matters." Mr. Turner snorted, dismissing Jake's words. "Love? That's not enough to build a life on. You'll ruin her life, mark my words." I felt a surge of defiance. "Dad, please. This is our wedding day," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. But before I could say anything more, my father's hand flew through the air, striking my face with a force I never expected. The room fell silent, shock freezing everyone in place. My cheek burned, not just from the physical pain but from the utter betrayal of my father. Tears blurred my vision, and I could feel the stares of our guests, a mix of horror and disbelief. Jake surged forward, his face filled with fury. "How dare you touch her?" he roared, his voice echoing in the now quiet room. Fists flew, and chaos erupted as family members rushed in to separate the two. In that moment, I felt as if my world was crumbling. My mother rushed to my side, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jennifer, I'm so sorry," she whispered, wrapping her arms around me, but it felt like a weak consolation against the storm that was brewing. The sound of sirens pierced the air as the police arrived, called in by one of my aunts. They pulled my father away, his face twisted with rage as he hurled curses. My heart broke at the sight of our beautiful garden turned battlefield. What should have been a day of love and joy had descended into chaos. As the guests began to leave, whispering words of comfort and confusion, I looked at Jake. His lip was bloodied, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. He enveloped me in a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer. This isn't how I wanted our day to be," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, I felt the pieces of my heart breaking and rearranging. I had hoped for acceptance, but instead, I had to face the truth about my family. The wedding I dreamed of had turned into a nightmare, and I realized it was a turning point, a moment that would propel me into a new chapter of my life. I needed to stand up for myself, for Jake, and for the life I deserved. This journey was just beginning, and I was determined to find my own path. The morning after the wedding, I woke up feeling an overwhelming mix of emotions. The sun streamed through the window of our small apartment in Tucson, but its warmth felt distant and cold. I could still feel the sting on my cheek from my father's slap, a painful reminder of how quickly joy could turn to chaos. Jake was already up, pacing the living room with a furrowed brow. "Jennifer, we can't just let this go," he said, his voice firm but laced with concern. I nodded silently, staring at my hands as they trembled slightly in my lap. I knew he was right, but I felt a heavy weight pressing down on me. The thought of confronting my father again filled me with dread. "What can we do, Jake?" I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's my father. I've always wanted his approval." Jake stopped pacing and knelt down beside me, taking my hand in his. "Your father assaulted you at your own wedding. That's not the kind of love or approval you should be seeking. We have to stand up for ourselves, for you." His words struck a chord deep within me. I had always hoped for my father's acceptance, but it was becoming clear that I could no longer wait for it. "You're right," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We need to do something." With a newfound determination, we started planning our next steps. Our first thought was to reach out to family members who witnessed the chaos at the wedding. If we can get them on our side, it'll be harder for him to deny what he did, I suggested, my heart pounding at the thought of confronting the family dynamics that had kept me silent for so long. Over the next few days, I called my Aunt Linda, Uncle John, and Cousin Sarah. To my surprise, many of them were more supportive than I had expected. Aunt Linda, her voice filled with compassion, said, "Jennifer, we've all seen how your father can be. It's about time someone stood up to him." I felt a swell of courage as I realized I wasn't alone. With each conversation, I gathered more testimonies about my father's controlling and abusive behavior. My cousin Sarah shared her experience. "I always felt uncomfortable around your dad. He has a way of making you feel small." With each story, the picture became clearer. My father's toxicity was not just a personal struggle, it had affected so many people in our family. It was time to break the cycle. One evening, Jake and I sat together, poring over notes I had taken during the conversations. "Do you think we should consider legal action?" Jake asked, his tone serious. I hesitated, feeling a knot of anxiety form in my stomach. "I want justice," I admitted, "but I don't want this to drag on and consume our lives." I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on me. Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with understanding. "We'll do whatever you're comfortable with, Jennifer, but he can't get away with this." After much discussion, we decided to meet with a lawyer. I found Mrs. Reynolds through a family friend. When we walked into her office, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Mrs. Reynolds greeted us with a warm smile. "I'm here to help you, Jennifer," she said, her demeanor calm and reassuring. "Tell me what happened." As I recounted the events of my wedding day, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. Mrs. Reynolds listened intently, taking meticulous notes. "You have a strong case, especially with the number of witnesses," she said, her confidence bolstering my own. "But be prepared. This will be a public matter and could get ugly." I swallowed hard. "I understand," I replied, my heart racing. This was my moment to reclaim my life and set boundaries. I needed to confront the reality of my father's actions, not just for myself, but for everyone he had hurt. In the following weeks, the whirlwind of planning and emotional upheaval became my new normal. I had never imagined that I would be gathering evidence against my own father, but with Jake by my side, I felt more resolute. He was my rock, supporting me every step of the way. As we met with more family members, I began to see the broader picture. Uncle John, usually the quiet one, opened up about his experiences. "Your father always had a temper, Jennifer. I wish I had spoken up sooner. It's time we put an end to this." With each story shared, my determination grew. This wasn't just about my wedding day. It was about breaking the cycle of abuse that had persisted for too long. One afternoon, I met with Aunt Linda at a local cafe. "You're doing the right thing, Jennifer," she said over coffee. "You deserve to live without fear of your father. We'll support you no matter what." Her words filled me with hope, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this battle. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of clarity. I was ready to stand up for myself and reclaim my life. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I knew I was not walking it alone. With Jake and my supportive family behind me, I was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did I know, the confrontation with my father was looming closer, and the fight for my freedom was about to begin. As the days turned into weeks, the anticipation of confronting my father grew heavier on my heart. The path we were on was daunting, yet I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer the quiet daughter hoping for approval. I was a woman ready to reclaim her life. Jake and I spent countless hours discussing our strategy, preparing ourselves for the inevitable showdown with my father. One evening, as we sat together at our kitchen table, Jake looked at me with concern etched on his face. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Jennifer? Once we confront him, there's no turning back," he said softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "I know, Jake, but I can't keep living in fear of him. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone he's hurt. I need to do this." The following week, we set up a meeting with my father at his office. As a businessman, he was accustomed to control, and I knew that walking into his domain would be challenging. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel strong and confident. As I looked in the mirror, I reminded myself that I was not just his daughter. I was a woman who deserved respect. When we arrived at Mr. Turner's office, the tension in the air was palpable. The walls were lined with awards and pictures of my father with influential figures, a stark reminder of the power he held. Jake and I exchanged a glance, a silent affirmation of our commitment to face whatever was coming. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady as I entered the room. He looked up from his desk, surprise flashing across his face. The initial warmth I had hoped for was replaced with an icy glare. "Jennifer, what is this about?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. I took a deep breath and glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "It's about what happened at my wedding. You can't treat people like that, especially your own daughter." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You chose to marry that truck driver. You're the one who brought this shame on our family," he shot back, his voice rising. "Shame? I love Jake. You didn't even give him a chance. You chose to attack me instead," I replied, my heart racing but my resolve firm. Mr. Turner scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You think you know better than me? You're just a child playing house." The anger bubbled inside me, but I refused to back down.
"No, Dad.
"I'm an adult, and it's time you recognize that." Your abusive behavior has hurt more than just me. I spoke to family members who witnessed your actions, and they're here to support me. Support you? They're all just jealous of our family's success, he roared, his face turning red. I took a step closer, feeling the courage surge within me. This isn't about success. It's about respect. You have bullied us for too long, and I won't stand for it anymore. I deserve to live my life without your control. Jake moved beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Mr. Turner, Jennifer has every right to stand up for herself. This isn't just about her. It's about breaking a cycle of abuse that has affected many in your family. The silence that followed felt deafening. I could see my father's expression shifting from anger to disbelief. You think you can just walk away from this family? You think you can take me down? It's not about walking away. It's about breaking free from your toxic behavior. I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I'm pursuing legal action. You can't treat people this way and expect no consequences. His face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I feared he would lash out again. But instead, he seemed to deflate, the weight of our confrontation settling heavily on him. You wouldn't dare. I already have, I declared. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. In that moment, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I had faced my father, confronted his abusive behavior, and declared my independence. I had done it not just for myself, but for everyone who had suffered under his reign. As we left his office, the weight of the world seemed to lift off my shoulders. Jake wrapped his arms around me, and I felt safe. You did it, Jennifer. You stood up to him, he said, pride shining in his eyes. Thank you for believing in me, I replied, my voice filled with emotion. I couldn't have done it without you. That day marked a turning point in my life. I realized that breaking free from my father's grip would not happen overnight, but I was ready for the fight. With Jake by my side and the support of my family, I knew I could navigate the difficult road ahead. The journey was just beginning, and I was prepared to reclaim my life and my happiness. The weeks following my confrontation with my father were both empowering and exhausting. I had chosen to take a stand, but the weight of the decision lingered heavily on my shoulders. Jake and I continued to gather evidence and testimonies from family members, and with each conversation, my resolve grew stronger. I could feel the tide beginning to turn, and it filled me with hope. One afternoon, as Jake and I sat in our living room surrounded by papers and notes, I received a call from Aunt Linda. Jennifer, I heard about your confrontation with your father, she said, her voice filled with warmth. I'm proud of you. We need to talk about how we can all support you through this. Her words meant the world to me. I had always admired Aunt Linda for her strength, and knowing that I had her support gave me the courage to keep pushing forward. We arranged to meet with several family members who were willing to stand up against my father and support our case. When we gathered in Aunt Linda's cozy living room, I could see the determination in everyone's eyes. They shared their own stories of how my father's behavior had affected their lives. It's time for a change, Uncle John said. We can't let him think he can control us anymore. With this newfound support, we met with Mrs. Reynolds again to discuss the next steps in our legal battle. You have a strong case, she reassured me, her demeanor professional yet compassionate. But be prepared for resistance. Your father will fight back. I nodded, my heart pounding at the thought of the upcoming battle. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. I want to hold him accountable. As we moved forward with the case, I found strength in the support of my family and Jake. We documented everything: testimonies, instances of my father's abusive behavior, and the impact it had on our lives. It was a long and painful process, but with each step, I felt myself healing. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I had imagined this moment countless times, and now it was finally here. As I entered the courtroom, I felt Jake's reassuring hand on my back. You've got this, Jennifer. No matter what happens, I'm here for you, he whispered. As the proceedings began, I faced my father across the room. His demeanor was calm, but I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. I took a deep breath and focused on the truth I was there to share. Mrs. Reynolds presented our case with clarity and conviction, and I found the strength to speak. "This isn't just about what happened at my wedding," I began, my voice strong. "It's about years of emotional and physical abuse that has gone unchallenged. I refuse to be silent any longer." My heart raced as I spoke, but I could feel the support of my family surrounding me, fueling my determination. I shared my story, my father's outburst, and the impact it had on my life. I could see the judge nodding, and it gave me hope. The tension in the room was palpable as my father attempted to downplay his actions, but his words fell flat. The testimonies from my family painted a vivid picture of the reality I had lived. They spoke of fear, manipulation, and the emotional scars that had lingered for years. Finally, the judge spoke. "It is clear that there's been a pattern of abusive behavior in this family, and it is time to break that cycle." Tears of relief filled my eyes. As the judge ruled in our favor, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. I had stood up against my father and reclaimed my voice. After the hearing, I embraced Jake, tears streaming down my face. "We did it," I exclaimed, feeling the weight of years of fear and pain lifting from my shoulders. In the days that followed, I chose to focus on healing and rebuilding my life. With Jake by my side, we explored new adventures together, helping others who had faced similar struggles. We found joy in community service and creating safe spaces for those in need. As I reflected on my journey, I realized that I had not only broken free from my father's grip, but I had also found my own strength and resilience. My story was one of empowerment, a testament to the human spirit's ability to rise above adversity. I was finally living for myself, and I embraced the future with open arms. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.